Hello and welcome to this Android development tutorial brought to you by North Border Tech Training. My name is Gary and this is part 2 of the series looking at how to program location-based services in Kotlin. And in this part we're going to look at how to get the last known location of the device, and we'll deal with the runtime permissions. But first of all, I just want to set up the toggle buttons and just get that little bit of coding out of the way. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I'll just code them in and speed up the video a little bit, and we'll just have a review of that. And you'll notice I don't need to actually use the find view by ID here. That's going to save us a lot of coding. All I did was actually reference the ID of the view directly in the Kotlin code, and you can see here that it's actually, what it's done is actually pulled in all the IDs of the views, and we can just reference all those directly. That's going to save us a lot of coding. We don't need to use the find view by ID method as we would do in Java. Okay, so all I need to do now is just set an onClick listener. Okay, so let's just zoom in, just have a quick look at what I've done here. So all I've done is set up the onClick listener for the GPS balanced, and if it's checked, then I'm just going to set the sensor text to GPS, otherwise it'll be cell town Wi-Fi. In a similar way, set up the onClick listener for the location on off, and if it's checked, then the updates are on, and if it's not, the updates are off. So that's all I need to do with those for the moment. Obviously, as we progress the tutorial, then there'll be more code to add there. Okay, so now I want to go on to deal with the last known location. Before we do that, first thing I want to do is just set up an immutable value here. The value will be just an integer value for the runtime permissions, and it's just a nominal number which you can pick that allows us to the callback method or callback function to reference the correct location, sorry, the correct permission, in which case it's going to be the location. So more about that when we come to do it. Let's just get that immutable value in place. So all I've done is set this immutable value and just calling it my permission file location and set that to 101. So we'll explain a little bit more about that later on. So I'm just going to set up one more variable. I'll just do it above here, and I'm going to just set up an instance of the Fuse location provider client, and this will be a variable. And we don't know what this is going to be set to at the moment, so we're just going to set this equal to null. Okay, and so what I'll do down here now is just after this point here, I'm going to set up a reference to the, or set up an instance to the Fuse location provider class. So it's just simply Fuse location provider. I'm going to make it equal to location services. And I'm going to get Fuse location provider client this context. So that's just an instance of the class. So what I'll do now, I'm going to get the last known location of the device. Now, what we do when we actually call a function to get the last known location, and what we need to do is set up an onSuccessListener. So if the last known location has successfully been found, then we can actually go on to update the user interface with that location. And like I said before, to do that we use a success listener. So this is what I'll put in place now. And what it'll do, it'll throw an error because it will want a runtime permission. But let's just get the code in place for the last known location and the success listener. So it's Fuse location provider client, and it'd be a last known location. Sorry, last location. And I'm just going to add an onSuccessListener. I just put a carriage return in here. So it's got some errors here because it's going to want to put a runtime permission check in there. I've never found a way for Android Studio to add that automatically as it does in Java, so we'll put it in manually. But we do need to put a null check in here. So let's just do that with the double exclamation mark. So I'm going to add the runtime permission check manually. So what we need to do is really just put an if statement there to check to see if the find location permission has been granted manually by the user. If it has, we'll go on to execute this code. If it has not, in other words, the else part of the if statement, then we'll go and actually call the runtime permissions and prompt the user to allow or deny those. So let's just get the code in place for the run check. Okay, so just format this code. I'm going to just zoom in. So all we're saying in here is that if the find location has been granted, so it's quite a long bit of code to reflect that, then we'll go and get the last location. Otherwise, we'll go on now to ask the user to grant permissions. So let's do that part now. So here, let's just put the else in. And just put a note here to say that we're going to request the permissions. So all we want to do is just call up the function request permissions, and it's very similar to what we do in Java. So I'm just going to pull this up, request permissions, and obviously we need to just set this array up, which is an array of permissions we want to pass to the callback function. And it'd be an array of permissions, but we're just going to be one element in the array, and that's going to be the find location. So we can say Android, that'd be manifest, that'd be permission, and it'd be access find location. So autocomplete makes things very straightforward there. And we just need a comma in here, and then we just need to pass the immutable value, which is 101, which we referenced earlier. So it's be my permission request find location. So that's the basic call done. You'll see there's an error here. The reason there's an error here, it wants a permission, an API check in here, because as you know, runtime permissions were only applicable from Android 6 or higher, and our minimum build is Android 5. So we're just going to put an version check in here to take care of that side of things. Okay, so what we need to do now is override the onRequest permission result. So this is called when the user enters response into the dialog box, and we can just type that here. What we need to do is type on request permission results. See it down here. So this will be overridden here. So what we need to do when we've got a few parameters that need to be put in here. You can see the request code. The request code is the immutable value, which we defined as 101. and we've got a few other elements here. We'll just deal with those as we actually put the code in. So this function is called when we have more than one permission that needs to be granted. So we need to decide which permission it's dealing with. We could do that with an if statement, but we do have the when statement, which is the equivalent of the case and break or switching case in Java. So we're just going to use a when statement here. We don't need it particularly in our case because we've only got one permission. So this is where we put the request code in. So when we're dealing with 101, which is our find location, then we need to do something with that. Obviously there might be other immutable values, say the camera might be assigned a value of 102, but we'll just deal with this one for the moment. So so it would be the case when it's my permission find location. So we just need to do the across arrow there. What we'll do is we want to look at the case if the permissions are granted. If the permissions have been granted, we don't actually need to do anything. If the permissions have been denied, then we'll simply pop up a toast message and finish the application. So we can say if grant results, and it's an array, but it's going to be just the first element in there, equals the we'll say package manager and be permission granted. Then we'll say just a note here, and we don't need to do anything. Okay, so that makes our life quite easy. However, else, this is where it's been denied. What we'll do, we'll just put a toast message up there, and we'll need to put application context in here, and it'll be just a message, and we'll say something like this: app requires location permissions to be granted, and we'll just make that a short toast. And we've just got to make sure we show that. Okay, and the next thing we want to do there is just finish the app. So actually that's our runtime permissions actually dealt with. We need to go back now and actually complete the onSuccessListener. So that's our next task. So we're dealing with it here. Okay, so we need to reference a parameter here, location, and it'll be there. Make sure that's spelt correctly. So it's going to, when we get the success listener and get the last location, it's going to pass the actual location into that parameter there. So what we can say is that if the location is not null, because sometimes it can be, we're going to then update the user interface. So we'll say if location does not equal null, then now we're going to go on to update UI. And really all we're doing when we're updating the user interface is changing the values in the text views. So let's just go through these systematically. First of all, it's going to be the latitude and longitude. So it'll be TV. I'm looking for latitude. And it'll be text. It'll be equal to the location.latitude toString. So that gets the latitude, and we just need to make that to a string. Okay, so very similar thing for the longitude. And for the accuracy, I'm going to check to see if it has an accuracy first. So if location, we can use the has accuracy method function, and then we'll go on. If it has, we'll go on to update that. Or if it hasn't, then we can just put an alternative note in there, something like no accuracy available. Okay, so you get the gist of what's actually going on here. So I'm going to do a very similar thing for the altitude and also for the speed. So just speed up the code here, speed up the typing here, and we'll just have a quick look at the end. Okay, so that's all the code that needs to be done for now. I'll just zoom in just to let you have a look at the last block of code I did for the user interface. What I'll do now, I'm going to test this on a real device. It won't really work on the emulator, but either way, it's really best to test location-based services on a real device. So I'll break off now and get back to the testing. Okay, so let's start the app. First of all, deny the permissions. What we'll do is go in again. This time I'm going to allow the permissions. And you'll need to hit the back button. I'll explain why you need to do that. And then start the app again, and you've got the last known location. So all I'm going to do is just test the buttons, the toggle buttons. You can see those are working as planned. Okay, what I'll do now, we'll just cut back and just summarize the tutorial. So the reason why I had to hit the back button there was that all dialog boxes are asynchronous. What it means is the app had actually started in the background before the permissions had actually been granted. So that's why there's no location viewed. So when I granted the permissions, I had to quit the app to reinitialize it, start it again, and it would start with the permissions granted, and then it would show the last known location. So it's just a behavior, and just be aware of that. Anyway, hope you found this one useful, and catch you in the next one. Bye for now. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you find this tutorial useful. All the project files and source code are available for download on my website. Thank you.